Wow, it's like when you're up here and you say good morning and you hear that, like compared to being a host where it's like you say good morning and people are like, oh, good morning. And you can tell it just gives a bit of people a bit longer to wake up. Well, my name is Kyle. I am the youth pastor here at Church on the Rock, and I'm very excited to be up here this morning. And I want to start with just a show of hands. Who here likes a good lawyer movie or TV show? Okay, most of you, and if you don't, you've probably never watched one, so you should, and then you'll become a fan, because they are just awesome. They suck you in, they drag you, and they're amazing. I love them because it's kind of like a good mystery where you go in and they're trying to solve it, except like the crime's already been like solved, but now it's like this lawyer trying to like what actually happened and get the truth out, because you know that whoever the defendant is, they're obviously innocent and someone else did it. And that's like the whole premise of lots of these lawyer movies. And so I love them. They just get me every time. And there's one in particular which is now in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. It sits in between Lord of the Rings and La La Land, which is like an esteemed place in my list. And it's this movie called Just Mercy. I don't know how many people have seen it. Actually, put your hand up. If you've seen it, put your hand up. I want to see. Okay, a few people. If you haven't, you need to go home and watch it. I'm going to give a bit of a spoiler, but it's still worth it because it is one of the best movies I have ever seen, and probably other people have ever seen. Don't just take my word for it. And in this movie, it's all about this black lawyer named Bryan Stevenson who goes down to Alabama, and he starts this nonprofit organization to give legal aid and counsel to inmates who are on death row. Like, talk about intense. And this wasn't now, this was like 40 years ago. And all the people he's working with, or most of them, were put on death row, and the charges were just ridiculous. And they weren't given a fair trial, and they're innocent. And so he says, I'm going to go, and I am going to help give these people the mercy that they deserve, and the justice that they deserve. And there's one inmate who actually is completely guilty of his crimes, and his name is Herbert. And you can tell right off the bat that Herbert suffers from mental illness, and he's had a rough go. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he suffers from PTSD, and he killed this woman with a mail bomb. And Bryan's working with him, and the jury didn't take into account whatsoever that he had mental illness, that he wasn't sane when he did this. And Herbert is just like eating himself with guilt. He knows he did it, and he regrets his actions so much. So Bryan's trying to work with him, but then he gets a call that Herbert's execution is set for tomorrow. And Herbert told him that if his execution got set, he wanted him to be there. And so then you get to witness this scene in the movie where Bryan goes and he's with Herbert as he's getting executed. And Herbert's one request was that as he's executed, they play the hymn, "The Old Rugged Cross," which, if you know it, it's just this song talking about the grace of God for all of us. And I'm going to get emotional talking about it right now, because then you watch as all the inmates are making noise and they're telling him, we're with you, we're here for you. And I'm not an emotional person. In the past 5 years, I've cried 3 times. And I'm not proud of that. I wish I was more emotional. But 2 of those times was in this scene. And I was like ugly crying. One of them was like a few weeks after Emily and I started dating, and I was like at the corner of the couch trying to hide it and trying to be quiet. And then I look over and I see that she's crying too, and then I just let it out. I was like, and it was bad. But it's this emotional scene that just makes every part of me desire mercy for him and his situation. But the thing is, in our lives, I think mercy is something that we often don't actually want for others, but we desperately want and crave for ourselves. Let me give a few examples. For professional athletes, when we're watching games and they're playing bad, all we want is to get them off or get them out of our team. I don't want him anymore. Whenever the Leafs lose in the playoffs, get rid of Mitch Marner. Come on, he's trash. That's all you see on Twitter. Some of our coworkers, if a coworker isn't doing good, or if they just bug us, it's like, can they just get fired already? Or just like talk to? Come on, they are just bad. And if you're on the highway and someone speeds by you, how often are we like, I just hope they get pulled over by a cop? Or, I know none of us would ever say that, but some people, one day they're going to get in an accident and they're going to learn their lesson. We just want others to pay for their actions. But when it comes to us, we want all the mercy and the grace that we can get. I'm on rec sports leagues, and when I have a bad game, it's like, sorry guys, I'm just off my game. I'm not normally this bad. Just let me off. If we're having trouble at work and it's just not our day and stuff is going on at home, we want people to know, do you know what? This isn't my fault. I have so much on my mind. I just can't focus on work. And if we're speeding down the highway, it's like there's good reason. I am late for something important you know nothing about. Just let me speed. And today we're going to talk about mercy. And if you feel at any point that I'm calling you out, don't worry, I'm calling myself out too. As I was writing this, I was like, oh, this is a tough one to talk about because I'm terrible at this. But we're going to dig into the Bible. And so the story we're looking at is John 8, 1 to 11. And this story is great. It's one of my favorite stories in John. And you'll notice if you open up your Bible, or for most of you, your phone, you'll see a little note that's added onto this story, which is that it wasn't added to the earliest manuscripts. And this is actually important. It tells us that when the Bible was being written and recorded, and so when we got the first manuscript of John, it didn't have this story. That wasn't written down. It was actually added hundreds of years later, probably around the year 400. And this is really important because some of us might think, well, then it doesn't belong in the book of John. But actually what that means is that this story was told just from word of mouth by people saying, this is an important story of Jesus. This was an important part of Jesus' ministry. And some really smart and prayerful people who were in tune with God said, actually, this story belongs in the book of John. This needs a place in the Bible. And this is actually where it goes, based on the theme and stuff. It's not that John wrote it, but this is exactly where God wants it. And so I want us to think of that. Whenever you see those brackets, know that there's good reason that that's added to our Bibles, even at a later date. And so let's go into this. This is what it says. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" Jesus declared, "Go now. Then neither do I condemn you." And then Jesus declared, "Go now and leave your life of sin." There is a lot to unpack in that passage. So bear with me as we start going on it. The first is that the woman that they've brought forward is alone. And I don't know about you, but something like committing adultery takes two people. And here we only see that this group of religious teachers, they bring forward this woman alone. And they're claiming that the law is actually forcing us, we need to stone this woman. Except in that same law they're using, it says that both parties deserve stoning. Both parties deserve to die. And I think there's a reason for this, because these religious teachers, they don't actually care about the law right here. They're trying to trap Jesus. They're trying to force his hand, force him to say, okay, then we need to stone her. And back then, it would have been way easier for this group of men to agree to stoning this woman than if there was another man up there. Then they would have said, we need to stop. And that's because of the sexism in this day, because of how they looked at this woman. She is just being used to trap Jesus in this moment. I think that these religious teachers, the reason there's not a man up there is I think they probably hired someone to actually help trap this woman, to get her in this position so that they could bring her forward. And even though this woman is guilty of the crime that they brought her forward to, she doesn't say, I'm innocent. She's also a victim in this situation. And she was a victim to these zealous religious teachers who didn't care that she was going to get hurt and killed in this process, only that they could beat Jesus and keep their own power. She was a victim of this process that said, we don't care who you are, and especially we don't care about you because you're a woman. We just want what's ours. And so she is both guilty and she's a victim. And I think all of us can relate to this because in our lives, we are all guilty. We know the wrong we've done. We know the hurt we've caused others, the hurt we've caused ourselves, and the hurt we've caused God. But at the same time, we are all victims. We can all think of times that we've been hurt by others. We can all think of times where things just haven't gone our way and it's not our fault. We've been hurt by systems of oppressions. We've been victims of trauma that's happened to us and shaped us for our lives that we didn't have a say in. Especially you look at when this happens to children, and it breaks our heart because they don't have a say in that, but now they're going to deal with that the rest of their lives. Now, the second thing I want to point out that I see in this passage is that actually when they say we need to stone this woman, that's illegal in where they were. They were in the heart of Jerusalem, in this Roman territory of Judea, and they're overseen by the Romans. They had no power. And so the Romans held all official rule. And so actually, the Romans said, you aren't allowed to enact any capital punishment, even though you're all Jews, you can't do that. That would need to come to us. And so when these religious leaders come forward to say to Jesus, the law of Moses says to stone this woman, they're trying to trap him in this. And I know what you're thinking, which is like, well, being stoned is legal in Canada, but that's a different stone. So just get that out of your mind. This is a different situation. This is a community act where they all say, this person broke the law, and we are going to get justice on them by taking stones and throwing at them until they die. It was a pretty horrific scene, but that's what they want. And so they're trying to make Jesus choose whether, okay, are you going to back the law of Moses, our law, God's law? And if you do that, the Romans are going to hear about this, and they're going to kill you. It would be Jesus saying, yeah, the Romans are going to hunt me down and get me. But if he says, well, no, the Romans don't allow that, we can't do that, then the Jews are going to abandon him. And all of his followers are going to say, you're not the real deal. How can you be from God if you deny his law and say that the Roman law is better? And so Jesus is backed into this corner. It seems like he has two options. But for those of you who have watched Suits and you know Harvey Specter, he says that when you're backed into a wall, you need to bring the thing down. I love Harvey, one of my favorite TV characters. And so what Jesus does is he doesn't argue that with them to say, no, we can't stone her. He doesn't also pick up a stone and throw it himself. He doesn't say anything. Instead, he bends down and he starts writing on the ground. What a weird thing to do, especially because it doesn't say what he wrote. It's like, why would you add that fact but you don't say anything? It's like that would be a pretty helpful thing to know. And lots of scholars debate over what he wrote. Some people think he wrote the names of all the people who had stones in their hand. Some people think he wrote the 10 Commandments. Some people think that as he was writing and doodling on the ground, that was just to take the attention off of the woman and give her a break and put it on himself. But I think none of those are actually what the Bible says, because the Bible doesn't say any of those. And we, yeah, which is, so what's the use in trying to figure it out? Instead, we know that actually the answer is right here in the Bible. And the answer is given to us. And 2,000 years ago, the people who would have been hearing this story, they would have known exactly why this is important. And it's because his actions were actually the whole message here. Because when it says he went down and he wrote with his finger in the ground, it would have taken everyone who was there right back to when Moses got the Ten Commandments, got the law from God that they were trying to use against him. Because this is what it says in Exodus. When the Lord finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant law, the tablets of stone written by the finger of God. Isn't that cool? Because now Jesus is bending down and he's writing in the ground with his finger. And so I assume he would be writing something like the 10 Commandments. But the main thing is, he was basically saying to them, yeah, that finger of God that wrote your law that you're using, that's my finger. I'm God. You want to talk to the guy who wrote this? You want to enforce the law? That's me. I was the one who created that. That is the ultimate mic drop moment. But the problem is, they don't even get it. They don't listen to him. They just keep pestering him. Okay, come on, Jesus, make up your mind. Do we stone this woman or not? And so then Jesus is like, oh, these idiots, they're not getting it. He probably didn't say that. But I know Ray would say that. But instead he says, let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone. And that's when it starts going in their mind. Then they're like, wait, what's he doing? Because then he goes back down and he starts writing again. And I think something clicks, and they're like, oh my gosh, he is saying that he is God. He is saying that he is the one who's written this law. And now he's saying, if you haven't kept this whole thing, then you have no right to judge her. And so he doesn't defend her innocence. Jesus isn't saying, she's innocent, she's fine, let her go. He's actually saying, you have no right to judge her. You have no right to inflict this punishment. But he is saying, the one who wrote the law is. And I think one of the interesting things about this is it's the oldest people in the group who leave first. It's not the youngest ones, it's the oldest ones, the ones who have had the most life experience, the wisest ones, the ones who can look back and say, I have had a life of making mistakes, of sinning, of hurting others and hurting myself, and now I am trying to hurt this, probably a teen woman. And I think they remember their whole life, and they're like, do you know what? I've had mercy before, and now I need to give it. I can't throw this stone. And I think knowing that this was most likely a teen woman is significant, especially because we are in a culture that looks down on teenagers, and people find, especially adults, they find teenagers kind of annoying. And as a youth pastor, I find that annoying because I'm like, I love teenagers. My job is to love teenagers. And it's funny though, because even you have grade 12 students who, when new grade 9 students come in, they're like, these kids are so dumb. They're just so annoying. They walk around the halls thinking they're all that. And it's this cycle. We all do it. But I think what these oldest people in the group remembered is, do you know what? I was a teenager once. I was dumb. I made mistakes, and I got grace over and over again. And the cool thing is, Jesus forced their mercy out. He didn't ask them, actually, could you rethink this? He was like, no, unless you're perfect, you need to drop that stone because you've had mercy before. And they recognized, yes, I did. Jesus forced their mercy out. I think we can do a helpful exercise in our lives, and we can see who we give mercy to, who we give grace to in our lives, who we look past their faults, and do they look like us? Do they think like us? Do they live like us? Um, Often, we can give people a break if we understand them or where they're coming from. But then, we need to think of the people that we condemn, that we don't give a second chance, that we just write them off and say, no, you're done, or we judge them from the onset. Are they different than you? Do they look different than you? Do they think different than you? Do they act different than you? The church, for a long time, has actually been really good at judging people, really good at condemning people. And this isn't just our church. This is like the big body of believers. I'm talking all across the spectrum. I think of the residential schools, which we're still finding unmarked graves. I think of countless alcoholics who would go to an AA meeting at a church, but then on a Sunday morning they'd walk in and they would just get stares. Like, do you really belong here? Or even the LGBTQ community who grow up knowing God hates me because that's what Christians tell me. We have been really good at judging people. And this might not be a church on the rock problem. You might think, well, I've never been part of that, and that may be so. But from the outside, people who don't know Jesus, people who aren't part of the church, they don't see the difference. They don't see the difference between someone from that church and someone from our church, or someone from a Catholic church and a Baptist church. They just see, oh, you're a Christian, so this is what you must think. So we need to fight really hard to show that actually we're different and we want to treat people different. We want to treat people with the love of God. And I'm not saying that sin in this isn't an issue, because sin is an issue, and Jesus says a lot about sin. Jesus cares a lot about our sin, and Jesus wants to take our sin away. But sin can't be the first thing that we think of when a new person walks through the door. Sin just can't be, because that wasn't the first thing that Jesus thought in a lot of situations. Jesus learned to love people, and then he would address their sin. And I think in our churches, we have a lot of mercy for some people who sin compared to others. We have a much easier time letting people go for greed and for hoarding their wealth compared to someone who has a same-sex attraction. And yet Jesus continually urges us towards mercy. And so now, in the story, once everyone has left, let's see what Jesus does next. Because now it seems like the woman is safe, but she's actually at her most dangerous. Because Jesus, he said, you know, if you have no sin, if you haven't broken this law, you can throw the first stone. And everyone else has left, but now he is the one without sin. He is the one who wrote the law that she broke. He can rightfully throw that stone at her. He can rightfully take the justice into his hands. And he gave himself that right. But this is what it said. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." This is an amazing moment. Jesus chooses not to condemn her. He wrote that law. He made that rule. And now he says, actually, I'm going to give you mercy. And I know most people will want me to jump to the, okay, get to the leave your life of sin. That's the part we like. We love trying to fix people's actions. We love fixing what's on the outside first, but so did the religious teachers. That's what they were all about. That isn't what Jesus is about. Jesus isn't making a contract with this woman. He's not, putting her on parole, like, okay, leave, but the next time you sin, you got to come back here, and sadly, we're going to have to stone you. Like, imagine. That would be ridiculous. That's not what he's saying. He loves her, and he wants the best for her. When he says, go and leave your life of sin, it's not a condition. It's this hope that he has for her because he wants the best life possible. And fixing sin, fixing our actions, it takes time. We know she would have sinned again. That takes time to change and to heal. But hopefully, she learned, actually, I need to seek God out in my life. Now, I want you to think of teenagers again, and I have a meme that we can show. Yes. So, That is, I had one youth last week say, if you're going up, you need to add a meme in this. And so for all the older people who are like, what on earth is this? I'll explain it. It's this 13-year-old saying, I won't become one of those adults who hates teenagers. And then that is the adult later, them, who hates teenagers. And I think one of the reasons why adults have a hard time with teenagers is because teenagers make a lot of mistakes, and they make a lot of the same mistakes that adults did. And adults love saying, okay, do this, do this, do this, or stop this, stop this, stop this. Except teenagers hate being told how to live, how to act. They want their freedom. They're owning that. And so there's this tension there because they hate being told what to do. Now, a tip, food can bribe most behaviors, especially in teenage boys. But if food doesn't work, then the best thing is to resort to earning their love and respect. From my years working with teens and youth and knowing myself when I was a teen, if you can earn their love and respect, then they may not do what you say immediately when you say it. You may have to have patience, but they will trust that what you're saying is the best for them because they trust, respect, and love you. And fun fact, I don't know if this can be stat checked, but adults are just old teenagers who can do taxes and like keep a job and stuff. Because adults hate being told what to do as well. We can't stand it. Come on, we're not teenagers anymore. We've grown up. Don't tell me how to live my life. We don't like it. We are just old teenagers. And so we will not be effective if our first priority is to lead people out of sin. We need to invite people to meet and fall in love with Jesus, and then he will do the heart work in them necessary to fix their sin. We can't do that. We can't force people into right action. Jesus will love them into changing their hearts. So there's a few notes that I want to finish up on that we can take away from this story. The first is that mercy isn't a one-time deal. It's not this thing we can give someone once and then wait the next time and say, okay, you failed once and I gave you a chance, but now your time has come. We need to drop the stones that we have. We need to drop the judgments that we have of people walking through the door. We need to lose our self-righteousness because as this story shows, none of us are righteous outside of Jesus because we have all sinned. We don't have the right to carry those stones. Third is we need to forgive. We need to be people who willingly forgive time and time and time again. I think the biggest impact Jesus had on especially the worst of the people he interacted with was he forgave them. And he said, I don't condemn you. That's a powerful thing to someone who knows that they're guilty. We need to be people to forgive. And we need to be people who are patient when someone makes mistakes or they get back into the same cycles they've always been doing. It doesn't mean that we need to live in toxic relationships or friendships that are harmful to us. That's not what I'm saying. That's not healthy. But we need to be patient with people, knowing change doesn't happen overnight. And with that, if you want someone to change, and if you're waiting for someone to change, how often are you praying for them? Are you praying for them every day? Because if you're not, then you should be. And maybe we need to change who we hang out with. Jesus continually was around people who needed mercy, who needed forgiveness, who needed grace. He couldn't stand the self-righteous religious people, but he loved hanging around the sinners. That was the people he spent most of his time with. So who are you spending your time with? Are you spending time with people who actually need to be shown God's love? And as a church, we need to be willing to welcome the sinner, to accept the broken, and to love the lost. We want to be a church that when people come in and they don't feel worthy of even stepping foot in a church and they're like, I don't belong here, we need to show them you do belong here, because we're all sinners. We all mess up. You are right at home. You are in your family. We get the privilege of sharing God's mercy with others. There's a verse later in John, and this is what Jesus says. He says, I have come so that they may have life to the full. Calling people to a life to the full means putting down the rocks that we have, the judgments we have, the preconditions that we want to set on people. It means putting those down. Because life to the full doesn't start with the death of sinners. Life to the full starts with the death of Jesus when he died for us and he gave us new life. In Romans 6, verse 6 and 7, it says, for we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin, because anyone who has died has been set free from sin. Guys, Jesus died so that we could have life. He doesn't condemn us. He gives us life. This is the best news that we need to share, and we need to own it time and time again. Whenever we come into this building, we need to own that we have died with him and we have rose again. That's what baptism is all about. Baptism represents that going under the water is dying to our sin, to that life of sin which Jesus called the woman out of, and being pulled up from the water. That's this new life where even though we may sin, Jesus has cleaned us, and he says, that's not who you are anymore. I have made you new. And if you are on your way to God, I want you to know that Jesus doesn't condemn you. Jesus doesn't stand with a wagging finger. He stands with open arms. He says, you may be guilty, but I don't condemn you. I don't want that for you. I actually want to give you life. I'll take that punishment that you deserve, whether small or large. I'll take that from you, and I will give you life with no conditions and full of mercy. I'll invite the worship band to come up now. And as we go into this time of worship, I want you to just reflect on a few things. The first is just reflect on his great mercy and his love. If ever we get to a point coming to church where we feel pretty good about ourselves, we need to take a look in the mirror and realize, actually, no, we may think we're the people holding rocks, but we are still the woman who is on trial, because we all mess up daily. And we need to come to Jesus and say, I need you. I need your grace and your mercy. And if you're a believer, we have a communion table at the back. And I just encourage you to go back there and spend time. And that's where we reflect on his sacrifice. And we have the wafer to represent his body, which was on the cross for us, and the juice to represent his blood, which he poured out for us. And what a fitting story to reflect on than this, where he told this woman, I am not going to make you die for your sin. Actually, in about a week's time, I'm going to die for your sin instead. And so we can reflect on that. And lastly, I just want to ask us to be a church that turns lives of sin into lives to the full for Jesus. Just what Jesus says. He wants to offer us a full life. He wants to offer us a life of love. And now we get to invite other people into that. And so I want to invite you to do that as we go into this time of worship. But first, just let me pray for us. Lord Jesus, thank you that you don't condemn us. Thank you that even though we deserve punishment, you give us mercy. And you say, I love you, and I want what's best for you. I want a life to the full. God, I pray that as we go into this time of worship, you would just be filling our hearts with your spirit and your presence. God, convict us if we need convicting. God, love us if we just need your gentle presence beside us. And God, speak to us now as we go into this time of praising you. I pray all this in your name. Amen.